Hi, my name is Kayla Abrams. I did the service learning project, and originally I was going to teach this lesson to a group of high school students who are in the yearbook program. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to teach them, but this is the presentation that I was going to cover in that class. Let me just pull it up. Okay, so I was going to do an introduction to some of the basics of photography. Yeah. So an introduction about myself, just a little bit. So I started taking pictures around when I was 13. I got my first camera. I didn't really know what to do with it exactly, and I just started taking pictures and figured out that I really enjoyed it. And soon started taking pictures for my high school's yearbook, just mainly doing photography. And then I moved to another school and I also did yearbook photography and eventually became a co-editor for photography for the yearbook program. And it was like when I started to really fall in love with taking pictures, and I realized that I could keep doing this out of high school. And right when I was about to graduate, I applied for a job at UVU to be an athletic photographer. And I was super excited because it's my first job out of high school and I didn't expect to get the job. And so now I am a creative photo associate for the athletic marketing department at UVU. That's a picture of me from before COVID, as you can tell. Just a little bit of my work showing that I'm okay, kind of qualified a little bit. These are just some of the pictures that I've taken for UVU. I do athletics, but outside of athletics, I like to do more creative stuff. I figured out through trial and error with doing lots of kind of photography that I really love doing creative editorial style photography. These are just some of my favorite pictures I've done over the last couple years. So the first thing I wanted to talk about with photography is kind of the first thing is try to find inspiration for what you want to take pictures of. You don't necessarily need to copy someone else, but find images that inspire you. I think social media is a great tool to use for this. You can find other photographers, you can find businesses, designers, even other athletic photographers as well that you really enjoy their photos and you want to take photos like that. I think also magazines are a great tool. Not only like fashion magazines, but there's also independently owned magazines that house photography, art. There's even athletic magazines you can find. Even billboards, you see lots of advertising. Photography is a great tool that people use for advertising. But in general, just try to find inspiration all around you. I'm constantly looking around at places, thinking, oh, like that'd be such a cool place to take pictures of this. And I usually keep a list on my phone and write places down that inspire me so that sometimes when I'm in a creative rut, I can go to that and try to find that inspiration. But there's tons of ways to find inspiration. You just have to kind of keep an open mind. And so the first thing of getting started with photography is, before you even dive into the camera, is how to hold it properly. I've seen a lot of people hold it improperly and it can be uncomfortable, but also it can even not set up your photo correctly. You can have the tilt way off and it won't be correctly aligned in camera, and you can fix that in editing, but sometimes when you do that, it cuts off subject matter and it's best to just try to fix it right on. So when you're holding a camera, you're going to put your hand underneath the lens to hold it and the other hand to hold the side. And so that way, when your hand is underneath the camera, you can be able to spin the lens to zoom in and out. As you can see on this left picture, she has her hand underneath the camera to hold the lens properly. You can also see how her elbows are down. They're not out. They're right underneath the camera to hold her steady. In this next picture, talking about how you can keep your feet shoulder width apart. You don't want to stand kind of into yourself. You want to kind of have a good balance on your feet so you can bend down. You can see in the difference between these images. You can see how they're standing far apart. In this one they are, but you can see how their shoulder is kind of going into themselves. They're kind of bending over with their neck a little bit, and that can be really uncomfortable, and you can strain those muscles as well. So I think this is really important. Another thing to talk about is that when you, especially in low light situations, when you aren't as confident with the lighting and stuff, it's good to find a wall or something to kind of lean up against so you can keep the camera steady and you can capture those photos properly. So diving into photography a bit. So the biggest part of taking a picture is the lighting. And there's 4 elements that play into your camera that help create a good lighting. One is the light, the second is ISO, third aperture, and the fourth is shutter speed. And I know that can sound like a lot right now. You're like, what the heck does all that mean? Don't worry, I will go in and explain this. So all these 4 elements are working together in your camera to create the best photograph that you can imagine possible. And there's also a couple other little things that you can tweak, but these are the 4 main elements that I definitely think you should master. Once you master these, you're set. You can do any situation, you can do sports, you can do indoor photography, you can even do night photography. So let's dive into that a little bit. So this is what the normal back of a camera will look like. This is a Canon, but you might shoot Nikon, you might shoot Sony, but they all kind of look like this. This is in manual mode that I'll dive into a bit later, but this is where you can kind of see your settings. So this right here is your shutter speed. This is your aperture, and this is your ISO. Don't even worry about anything right here for now. This is just a bunch of little tweaks that you'll make, but these are the main 3 elements that you're going to focus on. So the first we're going to talk about is just basic lighting. So certain types of lighting can affect how your camera captures these images, how your camera will read the lighting around you. So you can get light from the sun, you can get it from artificial lights or light bulbs, lamps, that kind of thing. But you can also get it from reflections. And I definitely recommend investing one of these reflectors. You can get them pretty cheap. You don't need to invest a whole lot of money in them. And the one I have has a silver, like this photo, but on the reverse side there's a gold, and it also works as a diffuser to diffuse harsh light. And I definitely recommend. It's only probably like $20. You don't need to spend a whole lot, and it adds a nice lighting element to your photograph. So these kinds of lightings can determine how you're going to take the best photo, and it's definitely something that you need to pay attention to. Where your light source is coming from can affect your images. So the next thing I want to talk about is what's called ISO. And ISO is the camera's light sensitivity. It's best described in this image below. So you can see how on the left, the subject is very clear, and as you go towards the right, they become very grainy. It's kind of hard to see them as much. So that's kind of what ISO does, and you're like, well, why would I want to add grain to my photo? The thing is, with ISO, the higher the number it goes up, the more light it adds into your photo. So if you're in a really dark situation, let's say you're taking Friday Night Football photos and it's really dark out, and even though you have the stadium lights, you're not getting as bright of images as you want, you would turn your ISO up and it adds more light into the photograph. So yeah, as I said, you use ISO to add lighting into your photo. This is something I usually set right off the bat when I'm going into an event or something. ISO is something that I like to set off to set right when I start. So the higher the number, you can see on the bottom, the higher the number, the more light it adds, but also the more grain it'll add to your photo. It's best to add in more light in low light situations. You can find your ISO right here on your camera. And this is kind of a general rule. It's not black or white. There's definitely a lot of gray area, but this is something if you're struggling with it, kind of, and you don't really know what to set your ISO. So when it's really bright out and it's sunny, you can set it to the lowest number or around 100. If it's kind of shady, there's lots of clouds, there's not a lot of harsh light, you can set it to a 400. And if you're doing indoor, sometimes with fluorescent lights or just inside, you can set it to around 800 or maybe even a little more, just depends. And then when you're shooting at nighttime, you can shoot around 1600, 3200, or even more. Just be wary that as you increase this number, there's going to be more grain in the photos. So this is kind of what an example is. You can see this is an ISO 100. ISO 3200 adds a ton of more grain, but notice how the lighting is pretty much the same. It just depends on the time of day. Like if this were at maybe around noon when it's super bright, I would set it around 100. But in the evening, maybe you want to turn it up to 3200. And when it's darker, a lot of these granules will fall into the background and you don't notice them as much as you do in this photo. The next thing is what's called aperture, or sometimes it's referred to as f-stop, whatever makes more sense to you, whatever easier. It's referred to as f-stop because when you're down here on this photograph, you can see it says f32 or f2. It's just sometimes an easier term, but they're interchangeable. Just remember that there's other words for it. So if you hear someone say aperture or f-stop, it's the same thing. So this is specifically a function of your lens. So most cameras, you can switch out the lens on your camera body. So you can have different lens for different situations. So each lens has a specific number or aperture that has a different range. So I'm looking at this camera right now. This is just a film camera, but since it's a longer lens, it goes, the f-stop is listed and it says f22, and it ranges from f22 to f3.5. So the lowest f-stop it can go to is only 3.5, and the highest is f22. So it depends on the kind of lens you have. Some more expensive lenses will have a wider range, and more expensive lenses will especially range to have a lower f-stop because most people love the shallow depth of field it gets. Kind of diving into what f-stop does. So f-stop is a big portion of lighting, as it is talking about how much your lens opens up to receive that light. So if I'm looking at f32 right here on the left-hand side, so you can see how this lens is closed. It's going to give you the least light. But in your image, it's going to have your subject in focus, but also your background. And then going to the far right on the other end of the spectrum, like an f1.4 or f1.8 is usually the range. You can see how the lens is opened up very wide. It's allowing a lot of light in. This is optimal for low light situations. So if you don't want to crank your ISO up really high and you're like, well, I'm just going to switch the f-stop to go lower and it'll allow in more light. The thing is that it separates your subject from the background a lot. So the subject will be very clear, but the background will be very blurry. A lot of people like this look. It just depends on your style and sometimes in the situation that you're in. So this is where your f-stop is located, right here. So this is kind of like an example of what it looks like. So these are, I'm talking about what it's called depth of field. So, oh, go back. Okay, so depth of field, you can either have a shallow depth of field or a wide depth of field. So a shallow is when it's the subject is in focus, but the background is blurry. So it kind of separates from the background. And then a wide, or sometimes it's called deep depth of field, is when they're both in focus. There's no blur. This is usually used for landscape photography, different things like that. And this is used on a shallow depth of field is usually used for portraits or even product photography, that kind of stuff. So these are a couple images I've taken. So both of these have a low f-stop, but in this left-hand image, you can definitely see there's a lot more of a lower f-stop. You can see that the background is very blurry, and even the subject matter of her hand in front of the camera is blurry in itself. I think you can use this to your advantage, and it's really cool. Sometimes I'll put a little bit of a, if I'm shooting outside and there's really cool bushes or something like really cool grass and I want to get a cool effect, I'll put it like a flower or like a piece of grass a little bit in the lens, just to have like that blur around it, and you can do really cool effects with this. This one on the right hand side, same thing. It's still a lower f-stop, but you can see how you can make out details in the background a little bit. You can see that this is rocks and there's a pathway and there's grass, but in this one you have no idea what's in the background. You have no idea if there's people back there, if it's a building, if you're outside, that kind of thing. So it just depends, but also the reason why I chose these f-stops, in this one I was getting a close-up. I mostly wanted it concentrated on her face. I didn't worry about as much of the details around the sides if they were getting blurry. Like you can see out here in the towel that it's already super blurry, even just inches away from her head. But in this photo, I wanted to get his golf bag and his outfit and his hat all in focus. So I turned the f-stop up. I think it was around maybe like an f5.6 or even an f8, maybe an f4. So you can still see the background and the details a little bit, but not as blurry as this other one. The next part of camera is what's called shutter speed. So this is measured by it's like a fraction of a second. So an example is like 1/500, 1/800, 1/60. For me, I mostly just worry about the bottom number. I know it can kind of be confusing just to throw in all these numbers into photography, and it's like, well, I just want to take the picture. I don't want to worry about all the numbers, all the math, but kind of learning the base numbers help a lot. So you can see on this picture that shutter speed is mostly used for capturing movement, but it can also help with lighting as well. All these elements are playing in together to all help with lighting, but they all serve a different purpose, but they can all tie together to help with the lighting of your photo. So the higher the number, you can see this is 1/1000, you can see the person is in focus. So this is optimal for sports, even dancing. And then on the other side is 1/2, and you can't even see the subject anymore. So you can do long exposures with these. A lot of times people will set their camera up on a tripod and do long exposures of cars driving by, and you can get really cool effects with these. It just depends on what kind of look you want. The thing is that with the lower numbers, you will get more light, and with the higher numbers, you'll get less light. So higher the number, the least amount of light there will be. And the lower numbers, the more light. That's a tongue twister. The more light you will have in your photos. So for around sports photography, the best is to at least shoot 1/500. Depending on the sport, if it's track or you're shooting football, it just depends. But at least do 1/500. Anything under than that, you'll start to get shakes or blurs, and it's just not optimal. So if you're in a really low light situation and you're trying to capture someone running, be sure to I usually set my shutter speed last, and then take a picture, see how it looks, and if not, I will go back and change some of my settings. So let's say we're shooting football at night, and I turn my ISO up to 1600, I turn my f-stop down to 2.8, and then I set my shutter speed to 1/800. That should be about good, but just kind of tweaking in to make sure your photograph looks good. Something that I always do is I'll take a picture and see how that picture looks on the screen, and then kind of make adjustments according to that. So this is where your shutter speed is located on your camera. You can see the fraction, it's 1/60. I usually don't shoot this low unless it's like for nighttime photography or I'm trying to get a long exposure, but this is just an example. Here's another example. You can see 1/500. This is really good for sports. You can see she's running. You do anything less than that, you start to get blurs, but you can really use this to your advantage to have cool effects. And play around with it. Don't be afraid to break. These rules are here, but you can also break the rules as well. This is just an example of a photo I took recently. You can see that he's in focus, but the ball is a little bit out of focus just because it's going so fast, but I was able to capture the moment when the ball is hitting the bat. And you can get really great photos if you turn your shutter speed up really high. Honestly, I think I was shooting at like 1/, at least 2000, maybe 2500. But it was a really bright day, so I was able to do this. So those are the kind of the 4 basics of photography that if you really work on those 4 things, that you can get optimal photos. The next part is just kind of diving in deeper into mastering your camera. So when you buy a camera, up on the top, there's usually a dial, and most cameras will have something like this, maybe even more, maybe less. These are just different modes of your camera. So this is like you can shoot in auto, where the camera will kind of adjust those settings for you. There's sports, landscape, different kinds of things that your camera will try to auto adjust for you. And although these are great, it's not great for your learning skills. And the best way to learn how to use your camera is just to get out and take pictures of anything. So what you mostly do to adjust all these settings is go into manual. Manual mode is when you control every single element of your camera. You can adjust the lighting, you can adjust shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO. You can go in and adjust everything to get it perfectly how you like it. These other ones kind of will do it for you, and if there's something that you want to change, you can't really change it as much as you would like into manual. So I suggest really trying manual. Maybe if your first time, try auto and see how you like it, and the next time you go out, try to challenge yourself and shoot manual. Maybe take a friend out and just practice taking photos. That's the best way to kind of learn how to use a camera. You can see up here, this is where it will show you the mode. I usually just always leave it on manual. I honestly don't use anything else, because as long as you can shoot in manual, you don't need any of those fancy, any of these other ones. Shooting manual is how all professional photographers will shoot. So although you have all these elements of ISO, f-stop, shutter speed, there are some little details that I was kind of talking about. Kind of one of these things. All these are kind of like little details, but this is another important element that I think people should really try to practice on, is what's called white balance. So white balance can adjust the type of lighting you're in. So auto white balance kind of sets, the camera reads the lighting and decides what's the best white balance for the situation. So you can see how it changes the color of these. So if you're out in daylight, maybe it's really yellow. The sun's adding a lot of yellow and warm tones. This will do that. So even like, I remember in shooting pictures in my high school gym, we had a really yellow floor and we had fluorescent lights, and I didn't really know which one to choose, if I should add in fluorescent or if I should do tungsten. And I remember trying both of these and learning that I like to shoot in basketball in our high school gym shooting tungsten because it cooled down all the yellow in the floor and then people's skin tones and added lots of blue. So you can just try out those kind of different lighting. I recommend kind of, if you want to practice this, take a picture doing auto and then don't change anything except your white balance. Maybe change it to daylight, change it to cloudy. Take a few pictures like this and kind of see where you like the colors. You can always edit those colors in Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop, but it's best to work in camera, so that way you don't have to spend a lot of time editing outside. You already have a really great image and you just want to touch it up a little bit. This is where you'll find your white balance. You can see this one's on auto white balance. Just kind of another thing to talk about is down here, it'll say raw. And when you're shooting images in your camera, you can either shoot, there's a variety of images you can shoot. Mostly it's either raw or what's called JPEG. And most photographs, like even on your phone, will shoot JPEGs, but there's a great benefit of shooting raw. You can get more details, you can edit it more in Lightroom, you can bring out those shadows, darken those highlights more if you lose some of that. Like let's say you're taking pictures and you have a really great image, but it's too dark. If you shoot raw, there's a more chance that you could brighten up that photo and it'll still be a great image. But if you shot them in JPEG and it's too dark and you try to brighten it, you might not save some of those details and it might not look as good. It might still be too dark to edit. One of the cons of shooting raw is that it takes up a lot of space. It's a larger file, but most SD cards or CF cards can hold raw images. That's what they're built to do. So I definitely recommend trying to shoot raw. At first I used to shoot JPEG and I didn't know a difference. I was like, a picture's a picture, but shooting raw just makes it a lot easier. You can do lots more things in editing and it just looks like a better and more high quality image. So this is kind of an example of something I did a couple weeks ago. So at UVU, we have one of our gyms is really dark, and this is the raw file and this is the after. So with the raw file, I wanted to capture the movement, but the lighting was so bad that I had to shoot darker. And I knew that if I was shooting raw, that I could bring out the highlights more. I could brighten it up. You can brighten their skin tones a little bit. So what I did is put it into Lightroom. I turned up the brightness, did a couple other things, and I was able to save this image. Otherwise, it'd be too dark. I didn't worry about getting these highlights blown out too much just because it was more focused on the subject matter. So sometimes you don't need to worry about having, if your highlights are too blown out, your shadows are too dark, it's okay. It just depends on the photo. But in this one, I was able to save it because I was shooting in RAW. Now that I've thrown all of that craziness at you to kind of let it digest, another thing I wanted to talk about is you need to create a portfolio for yourself. When you're applying for most photography jobs, they want to see your work. I mean, you can sell yourself, you can give your word that you're amazing, but they want to see your work. They want to see what kind of skills you can do, what your experience at shooting, so they can kind of get a feel for what your skills are. Some of the basics is that when you're creating a portfolio, you want to show off your best work. You want to be proud of the images that they see, and you want to be like, yeah, that's my work. Like, be proud of it. Another thing is that you want to have a variety of photos. So don't just put up a bunch of pictures of portraits, you know, like you're controlling the image of even the same photo shoot. They don't want to see 50 pictures of the same photo shoot. So even add in, you know, some sports photos. Maybe you've done some family photos. You've done a couple other portrait sessions. Show different lightings. Maybe show some that you took in the middle of the day, some in the evening, maybe some night photography, just so they can kind of get a feel of what your skills are. Another part of when you're making a portfolio is to show like what you're passionate about. If you really like shooting sports, show a lot of sports photo, but still add in a variety so that they know that you can do other things. If you really love doing portraits, do lots of portraits, but also still add in a variety, maybe doing like group photos, family photos. You can add in some sports or landscape, just to have a little bit of variety, but kind of emphasis what you like. And if you don't know, that's okay. Just add in lots of photos that you're proud of, that you like. So this next part, I'm kind of gonna embarrass myself a little bit. This was my portfolio that I turned in to UVU when I was in high school. This was the website. I created mine on a website. Sometimes you might need to do it on paper, but most of the time it's like, you know, send me a link to your portfolio. For me, I was like, well, I'm kind of creating a website, so I can kind of make it into a portfolio. So this was my portfolio I turned in that I created in high school. It had a homepage, you know, these are some of my images. So you had some variety in there, some sports, different types of lighting. This is harsh lighting, while, you know, this one is softer lighting, that kind of thing. I had some family pictures that I took, some portraits, but also some creatives. I had some landscape ones, more sports, just so you can kind of see that I was able to capture different things. So that was just the homepage, and then you kind of go into my portfolio, like an overview of all of my work. These are some of my favorites. When I picked a couple images that I really liked and I wanted people to see right when they opened. So these were two. Kind of go down, you can see some sports, landscape, different ones of people, nature, group photos, some creative stuff, fun ones, you know, that kind of thing. Also had a variety of models as well, just kind of showcasing that I could do different types of things in photography. I even had an underwater photo. I was like, I'm just gonna throw that in there. You know, I'm up for a challenge. So these are just kind of some of the things that I had. Kind of goes on, continued. Yeah, it's not super great. I also had an about, because it was a website. So I had, I haven't updated this in a long time, but I had some like my awards that I had for photography. Definitely show that off. Show that you can do that you have been recognized before. I had a little bio. I had pictures of me so people could kind of, you know, get to know me, that I didn't feel like a stranger, kind of see my personality, just instead of just behind camera. Yeah, so this was my one in high school, and there's a lot of stuff I would change about it, but I'm just kind of showing you that you got to start somewhere. So there's that. So it's not perfect, and there's a lot of things I would change about it. I am currently updating my own photography portfolio and website. It's under construction, and it still has a long way to go. So I, for another one of my classes, I'm in an art class, and we had to create a portfolio for ourselves in my art class. And so I'll kind of show you what I did in that class and kind of what I would change about my other one. So right when you open up, there's a first image, something that I'm really proud of, that I want to show off, that kind of sets the tone for the rest of my website. Super easy to navigate. It has a home. I have a gallery of a lot of my artworks. I also minimized the size down as compared to my last one. So you aren't overwhelmed with these large photographs. But also with this one, you can click in to these photos. You can have a description. I don't think you need to do that for your photos on your website, but you can. This was just for art, but that is an option. But I made it so that you could click on it and it would be larger, and it wasn't, so you can kind of overview, and if you wanted to get a closer look, you can tap into them as well. So this is just like a short little gallery. And then I have an about. In my other one, I had more of a personality. This is a more professional one. I also included an artist resume as well. I embedded a PDF so that you could click on it and it would open up a new tab. Just kind of a background of me for my art. I would definitely kind of do a mix between this and what I did in high school. I, had like a little bit of my personality, what I like doing. This is just strictly professional. But if it's a portfolio, you could kind of mix it up and do a little bit of both. Definitely include awards or features or anything that you've accomplished. Looks really great, especially giving dates for things like in this one I said in 2021. That looks really great. I'll set a contact. I don't think it's necessary when you're creating a portfolio to have a contact, because if you're emailing your portfolio to someone, they can get a hold of you because you're emailing them and they have your email. But also include your resume as well. So that's just kind of some little things I would change, but I just wanted to show you like where you start off and you can work up to different things. But it's good to have a strong portfolio with lots of variety. Yeah. So the next part of it is you want to showcase your work, not only to future hirings, but also just creating a network of yourself that you want to, if you want to be a professional photographer, you need to make yourself seem like a professional photographer. So you can create a social media for yourself with all of your photography. I definitely recommend doing that. You can promote yourself, also promoting yourself on your personal pages or getting your friends to promote you too, because that's great business. So for me, this is just a screenshot of my photography Instagram. So for me, I really like taking pictures of couples. I like taking pictures of portraits, editorials, fashion, that kind of stuff. And so I don't post my athletic photography on here because, I shoot athletics all day, but I want to have clients to shoot pictures for other things. And so when I post on here, I post all of my creative work. Here's a couple, some photo shoots I've designed, that kind of thing, because that's what I like taking pictures of. So sometimes if, you're like, I really want to do wedding photography, you can, get someone, tell them, oh yeah, I really want to do wedding photography, and maybe they agree to let you take pictures of their wedding. Post that wedding like a ton on your page, post detail shots, post family shots, pictures of the bride and groom, pictures of the bride, and kind of fill up your feed. And that way when people are looking for a wedding photographer, they'll go onto Instagram and, they'll see, wow, this person like loves doing wedding photography. Even if you've only shot one wedding, like you sometimes just have to fake it until you make it. And that's just kind of the reality of things. For me, in my bio, I say I'm a creative director. I do portraits, editorial, and for me, a lot of the times it was taking pictures with my friends and creating photo shoots with my friends, having them model, styling them, like that was my specialty, and even though I'm not an official professional editorial photographer, that's something that I market myself towards. So definitely showcase your work, showcase what you're proud of, because when other people are looking for photographers, they are looking for a specific kind of photographer that's going to deliver what they want, either weddings, families, portraits. So market yourself to what you want to shoot. If you're not sure, just show a variety of stuff. Show that you, once again, that you are able to go into different situations, you can understand the lighting, that kind of thing. So yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. Normally, if I was doing this in person, I would answer questions about, camera stuff along the way, about different aspects. I was planning on, asking questions after different camera stuff, but I'm not able to. Let me just close out of this. So that is more of my formal presentation of what I was going to do for my service wedding project.